Hey, all you rad dads out there.
Why don't I start by, first of all, saying thank you for being here. And who are you?
Who am I? I ask myself that every day. I guess in relation, like for purposes of this podcast, my name is Jason Hammel, and I have been a longtime musician in a band called Mates of State, and it's in a group with my wife, and we started dating in college and started playing music together. Eventually got married and started releasing albums and touring for the better course of probably 12 to 15 years or something. And we had got married, had kids, and brought our kids along on tour. So I think that's how it relates to this Rad Dads podcast.
Right. So, but you do some other stuff now. So what are you up to these days, Jason?
Now I'm more in the film world. I kind of, once we used to tour like 6 to 9 months out of a year for a decade. And as our older kids got a little older and had more like roots in school and with their activities, we sort of pared that down a little bit. And so I was like, how can I transition sort of what I love to do that's related to music into another sort of industry? So it sort of stemmed from me making our music videos. I would, when we first started, I would, be the ones that would like write the treatments or produce the videos or hire the directors or hire the teams or get my friends to do that stuff. So just sort of spearheaded the making of those music videos and realizing that I really started, or that I enjoyed being on set. And then also like creating with collaborating with film people, writers and directors and DPs and that sort of thing. So I slowly kind of started to reach out to some contacts I had in the film world and started to get, popped in and got in on as like, even as like an assistant on some film sets for TV. Mates of State actually made a film, a feature film. And that really kind of, I learned a lot on that. We were like the main actors, but we were also producers and wrote the music for it. So that consumed a better part of like 6 months for us, where I really got to learn like how that process and film works. So since then, I've just sort of parlayed that into, I continue to work on TV stuff. I've worked on some commercial stuff, advertising, as well as my own like artistic and pet projects too in the film world. So that's kind of what I'm doing currently.
Right. So it's kind of been that smooth transition. So I'm kind of curious. You said when you guys were involved in making your music videos for your band, that was kind of sparked that interest for you. So I recall when I first got into your band, it was kind of, late in your career, I'll admit, when Rearrange Us came out. Kind of big into the Barsook bands of the time and, heard about your album. And I remember really vividly seeing your video for My Only Offer and just being like, oh my God, this is amazing. It's a great video. So I'm curious, did you have like something to do with those videos as well?
Yeah, that was definitely a big turning point as far as like us making videos too. I'm trying to think. Well, no, we started with some of our earlier, I guess even from our first album, we made a music video back in like 2000.
Well, that was kind of the thing to do around that time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and it was like we had a friend who was like, "I'll make a video for you," and we're like, "Let's do it," and we just kind of like piece it together. But with Rearrange Us, that's where we first started to have some like work with like real directors and real writers and real sort of producers on videos, and it was a really fun time. And My Only Offer was one of those cases. And we worked with like this great director, and they had like production designers and art designers and everything. And we went into this fashion designer boutique store in Brooklyn, and that's where we shot it. And I remember Kori, our first kid was born too, so it really sort of relates. No, it was our second one actually. It was June. It was 2008. And Kori had just given birth like a month or two ago, so she was still like nursing. So we in the video we get into these like glass cages, basically plastic cages with our instruments, and then it's like all these balls are being
It's like
dumped
ball
inside.
pit balls kind of.
Yeah, that are
Yeah.
being filling up and like burying us as the song goes on. But because we were in these not glass, but like plastic cages the whole day while they were filming up. Kori was like nursing our baby, so the baby would have to be handed in through the top.
No way.
Cover like the glass wall so Kori could nurse, and then she'd hand the baby back.
That's hilarious.
But yeah, that album. We made a really great video for Get Better with my friend Steve Chu, and that was like, I think to date maybe our highest budget video, and he really wrangled that one. Had this guy Daniel Garcia who directed it, and that everything they did, they made like these masks, those animal masks.
Yeah.
They had choreographed dancers and the whole nine. So that, yeah, those making some of those videos during that era was a big turning point for me, and me being able to see at like what level, how involved like making film could be, and then relating it to the music and tying it back to like the album was really the collaborative fun part for me too.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, it's neat to kind of hear how that experience kind of, turned into kind of a new career path for you down the road.
Yeah, I would have never guessed it at the time. I just know that I really enjoyed learning how the pudding is made,
Right.
It was really fun.
Right. So you have mentioned you guys have 3 kids. So quite notoriously, I remember around the time Rearrange Us came out, I think Kori was like writing a blog about it's like Band on the Diaper Run or something like that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I remember lots of kind of coverage about your guys' band and how you brought the kids on tour, and it was kind of like a family band thing. Now you guys have. At that time, I think you had 2. You just mentioned, right? So you said June, and what's your oldest daughter's name?
So Magnolia is 16 now.
Okay.
June will be 13, and then we have a 3-year-old. So 10 years later, we had another.
And so you're just thrust back into it, hey?
Yeah, but it's been great. It's been like such an awesome like new dynamic to the family. It's like seeing like the older 2 now be like older, especially like the June, the middle kid, was like the baby before, and now she's like a big sister.
Right.
And just adding sort of levity, like a new levity to all situations, because there's like a little one running around. So it's been really fun.
Speaking of levity, I think I saw on your guys' Instagram account, it must have been, what's your youngest name?
Phoebe.
It must have been her birthday party.
Yeah.
And Kori was helping her blow out the candles and spit on the cupcakes.
Yeah, this was just like last week or 2 weeks ago. Yeah. The 3-year-old is like starting to understand the concept of blowing out the candles and just like giving it her all, but not quite doing it, and spitting like COVID all over the cupcakes. Like trying to like keep her from getting burned, and then and like helping her blow out the candles and just like spraying even more all over the cupcakes.
Yeah, I mean, it was just like a perfect image for a parent. Like, this is the kind of stuff that you're dealing with all the time. So I thought that was really hilarious.
And she, the whole time, she's like, you better get this on video, and I'm like, I'm trying. I was just like steadying it. All of a sudden, I was just like, I just got this like loogie shooting across the screen. Yeah, it was pretty funny.
That's amazing. So
nobody ate those cupcakes except Phoebe.
Right. Just like, yeah, no, we're good.
I didn't touch them.
That's so funny. I remember because I've got 2 young daughters as well. And for most of their birthdays, like, you put the cake in front of them and they're blowing out the candles and you can see the spit. And you're just like, oh man, like I feel so bad offering this to anybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah, just not a good idea.
Yeah, it was pretty funny.
Yeah. So you've got 3 kids, one, 10 years younger than the other 2 kids. So kind of a new dynamic in your household. What's that kind of transition been like? Has it been easy for you guys? Like, it's like riding a bike, having a baby, a toddler around?
Yeah, as far as like the parenting stuff, yeah, that's just like riding a bike. It comes back to you. You think like, oh, do I even remember how to do that? But you don't even think about it. You're just like, oh yeah, changing diapers and feeding them and making sure you get like routines and that sort of thing. The one thing that's probably obvious that you're just like, this part sucks, is the lack of sleep. Like the first year, depending on how good a sleeper the baby ends up being. But I mean, Kori, Phoebe didn't really sleep through the night for an entire year. And because Kori was nursing, she kind of took the brunt of that.
Yeah.
So literally like for the entire year, she didn't get a full night's sleep. And that what that does to your, your psych, you psychologically is not healthy, you know,
Yeah.
physically and psychologically. So I remember like after the year marker, Kori's just like, I need to sleep. So she would literally just like go downstairs in the spare bedroom and like sleep, you know, like I need to get full night's sleep. And that made a big difference. So, you know, long story short, it's like that, the lack of sleep thing is never easy. But otherwise, you know, it's been really great. It's weird. It's hard to say because like the last year has been overtaken by like quarantining.
Right.
In like Phoebe doesn't really care about that in so much that, you know, she just plays and does what she does, and we try to get out with cousins and that sort of thing. And she's actually in preschool now, but the one thing that is sort of been detrimental and that the older two got to do all the time is see their grandparents and their other families, because we
Right.
were always traveling. And sometimes we would even bring like Kori's mom would come and be the nanny while the kids were little. So
Yeah.
she had like really, the kids had a really close relationship with their grandparents. And then my family's all in Minnesota. So we would go and see them like 3 times a year just because we
Yeah.
were always on tour, and we'd stop in and stay with them for a few days and they would come out. So we saw them a lot. And then so Phoebe, because of this, doesn't know her grandparents really at all. And that's like
Right.
a big difference from the first two, you know, and we're like pretty tight family in that way, even with our extended family in that way. So I think that's been the biggest sort of bummer
Yeah.
about that, but everything else has been good. You know, we get to hang out a lot as a
Yeah.
family.
That's,
You know?
you know, and talking to people over the past 9 months, that's the one silver lining people are kind of identifying, right? You kind of have to find those silver linings, but that you kind of, as a family, you get a bit more time together. You know, in a lot of cases, parents are working from home, kids are maybe home, you know, for school or whatever, or not in daycare. And so you're kind of forced into that situation. And that's been something that, yeah, other parents have kind of talked about being, yeah, a silver lining, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, um, so you've got 3 kids. You kind of talked a little bit about that change in dynamics. Are you seeing sort of the older kids taking on a bit of that maternal role a little bit, or being interested in that? I guess I see that a little bit with so I've got a 5-year-old and then a 2-year-old. My 5-year-old is so funny, like kind of likes to mimic the way we parent, right? And she'll kind of say, "Oh, that's so cute, Nora," and you know, she's like kind of trying to be the mom.
Yeah.
I mean, it wouldn't be kind of pretending for your older kids, but do they kind of like having that, you know, younger child around?
Yeah, you know, in certain instances, I would say it's very episodic
Okay.
because of their ages, you know. Like the oldest one just got her driver's license,
Okay.
and because she's, you know, mostly doing school remotely, when she does have a chance to do stuff for herself, she wants to do stuff with her friends. So it's
Right.
not like she's like begging to babysit, you know. Same with and then sort of like June, it was cool to see her going from being the older sister or the younger sister to being like a bigger sister now. And she would, you know, she's 10 years older, but she would be like teasing Phoebe, and I'd be like, "You're teasing a baby." And I was like, well, that's what bigger sisters do. They tease their younger
Right.
sisters, you know, regardless of the age. I think it's just like a natural instinct of almost like well, that's how you know, teach the younger ones things, is you got to like tease them into it, you know. And that I thought that was kind of funny in a way, but she's also like very protective of her too, you know.
Yeah.
Like you can see like she's like, oh, they're aware of like, oh, she's near the stairs or whatever. So I think that instinct stuff, and that's cool to see, and I think that's been really good for both girls to have that experience now too.
Yeah. Cool.
Like think of somebody else and see like, oh, a younger person, and what you have to do to help them sort of, you know, protect them all the time, because otherwise they'll just like jump off a cliff, you know.
Right. So Jason, this is the Rad Dad show. So do you consider yourself a rad dad?
A rad dad. I try to be. I try
Yeah.
to be a rad dad. um
So what does that mean to you? What's a rad dad?
I think being a rad dad is being really open with your kids. I think I think you got to spend time with them. You know, that's one thing that my dad did. So I was lucky in that I had a really good role model, and I think that's key. And I always knew, like, I wanted to be, when I did have kids, I wanted to be a good dad and I wanted to be available to them. So, and I enjoy hanging out with my kids. I want to do stuff with them. I want to teach them things. I want them to teach me things. And so I think that's what being rad is just like spending time with the kids and then being open with them too. And like leaving everything sort of transparent and on the table. And you can, you know, like they're going to mess up. They're going to do things that you disappoint you, but that's completely natural. And like it seems like they're messing up at this age a lot less than I did. So I'll be like, oh, keep messing up to that degree, because you got a long ways to go before I can really like get after you for it.
So what do your kids think about what you do? Like your kids, your older kids at least, have been a big part of that, it sounds like. What do they think about your career, and I guess their parents being, you know, well-known musicians?
I know that you know, they were up until about age 8 or 9. They were a lot of time on the road, spent a lot of, maybe 10 for Maggie, spent a lot of time on the road traveling. And I know that they really liked that, you know, and I know they like spending time on the tour bus and seeing all these different places and, you know, traveling abroad and that sort of thing. And I think they missed that. I remember when we first started slowing down touring, they're like, we want to go on tour again, you know, and we're like, well, we do too, but the circumstances just aren't right for it right now. Um, and then I think they think it's cool. I think it's good for them to like, you know, I don't think they like listen to our music at this point in their lives very much, or will admit that they do, or even know like are like deep fans of it, you know like our deep catalog. And I'm only guessing that at some point they probably will go back and be like, oh, what exactly did my parents do? Oh, or stumble upon it and discover like
Right.
the depth of music that we made, you know, or and continue to make. But I think they think it's cool. You know, we play a lot of music around the house, and they sing, and we talk about music all the time, and they show me cool music and I show them cool music. So it's definitely a big bond for us still. And I think it is for most people. Music is just touches everybody, you know.
Cool. So you kind of touched on your relationship with your dad earlier. So can you tell me a bit more about what that was like? You kind of, you know, implied that kind of affected the way you approached being a parent. So can you, yeah, kind of explore that a little bit more for me?
Yeah, my dad, Steve Hammel, he's a good guy. They my parents actually got divorced when I was like in second grade. And even then I knew that my dad really cared about us. So they had 4 kids already. So they were, by the time they were like 26, they had 4 kids.
Wow.
So they jumped in a hurry, you know, and then they got divorced a few years after that. So, but my dad immediately, I remember him like when they got divorced, he brought all 4 of us kids in, and we were sitting on like my bottom bunk bed or whatever, and
Yeah.
he told us like, you know, I'm moving out, your mom and I are getting divorced. And we are all just like, what does that even mean? You know, like at
Yeah.
that age, it's like, what do you mean you're leaving? You live here. Like, where else would you live? You know? And I remember it being like a huge blow to us, and my dad actually like crying in tears. And I was just like, oh, he's even crying. I'd never seen my dad cry before. I was like, that must be a big thing for him, you know, especially now when I look back on it. And now that I know it was a big thing for him, because I think his biggest, you know, probably internal rub was he was like, this isn't good for my kids, and I really want to be a good dad. So, you know, fast forward as things progressed, he moved into the same town. He stayed in the same town. You know, he paid like child support religiously. He got us on his weekends, you know, every other weekend or whatever it was like decided. And we did things when we were at his house. You know, he spent time with us. We would go play baseball and go to the movies, go to the parks. Like he spent like real time with us, you know. And as we got older, that didn't change. And eventually, you know, we ended up, you know, some of us we actually moved in with my dad. But they always lived in the same town. My dad, you know, like is just very involved, you know, and I think that's where I got the, like, you just have to be involved. Like that's really, you know, you only get your kids for a short, I think I read the statistic though, that like from the time that your kids move out of the house at 18, you'll have spent 90% of the time with them that you ever get.
Wow.
So like, yeah, that's like a crazy stat when you think about it. So
No
it's like,
kidding.
yeah, and you're like, I will only see my kid 10% more of the time that I ever get, you know?
Yeah.
So, and I think obviously my dad didn't have that stat on his mind. He just wanted to be with us, you know?
Yeah.
And so now but I keep that stat on my mind because I'm like, yeah, whenever you, like every day you're tired, whatever, but they want you to help them paint their bedroom or whatever. Yeah, let's do it right now, you know, like, because pretty soon she's going to be 16, she's going to have her license, and that time is dwindling, and then she goes off to college and you got 10% left, you know?
Yeah.
So, and then the other thing, I'm kind of just rambling, but the other thing is honesty. You know, I think just like, don't judge them for like mistakes and that sort of thing. Just let them make it and then discuss them, you know, like
Yeah.
why did you make that decision? What were you thinking? Blah, blah, blah. And then let them figure out like, yeah, maybe that wasn't a good decision, but let them figure it out rather than being like, I told you never, blah, blah, blah. You know, it's like that they have to learn. And the only way to do that is to allow them to like transparently fail, and then just,
Yeah.
and then like course correcting, you know?
Well, you mentioned earlier, kind of when you were talking about traits of a rad dad, you had mentioned that openness, right? And it sounds like your experience with your dad when he sat you guys down, told you, what was happening with the divorce, that
Mm-hmm.
was a really poignant moment for you, right? And maybe that's
Yeah.
kind of part of that same thing, that openness of just, this is what's happening, doesn't change how much I care about you, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and it is funny, like as you go along, you kind of start to realize, I kind of know, even just from my experience as a kid and kind of growing up, like you start to realize your parents aren't just these beings that float around to serve, serve your needs. They're actual people who struggle and have problems and challenges, and they screw up too. And so I guess that maybe that is something that it's good to be open with your kids about as they're growing up, that I'm a human too, and they might see you cry or fail or be upset or whatever, and that's normal.
Yeah, it's funny when you first realize that they're human and not superhuman too. You're just like, oh, that's a flaw in them that I don't like that, but it's still them, you know. It's still my dad or whatever. And you're like, I wonder if I could get him to break that habit or to see this differently, because he is human rather than superhuman, you know. But I've also had those instances where like your dad, I can't think of one now, but where you actually will like have a discussion about your dad and you'll see him apply it to his life, and you're like, oh, like we had an adult like conversation that actually he incorporated into his life, you know, rather than him just being like the Superman being like, here's how things go and here's what you need to do, you know. So I always thought that was pretty cool, and I was like, oh, he actually values my opinion and is like tries things out if we like have a discussion about it, you know.
Yeah. The other thing you mentioned that I thought was kind of interesting was that statistic, because a lot of people we talked to on the show, like that's obviously a big focus. People kind of, identify that that's a really big part of being a good dad, in their definition, is that, kind of being involved, just paying attention and, being present, because you might not have a whole lot of time for that later. And I was kind of thinking about how, I remember when I moved off to university, my parents were in Medicine Hat, and I had moved up to Edmonton. And I think it was like a week had gone by and I hadn't called my mom. And she phoned me one day and I, hello? And she was just bawling on the phone. And it was like, it had only been a week since I talked to her last, but for her, it was this huge, kind of culture shock of not having your kid around. Right. And so I know that moment has really stuck with me as well. And you do kind of have to remind yourself that as, your kids are growing up and you're busy with things, and they, dad, come help me with this, or come do this. And like, oh, but I just got this text, I need to just respond to this, or, oh, I'm working on this or that. You kind of have to check yourself a little bit with that.
all they want, man, is you to call them for 5-10 minutes. It's all they
Yeah.
want, that'll
Yeah.
make their week. Same with like my grandparents, like my grandfather's still alive, and I'm just like, just call him, like try to call him once a week and just be like, yo, what's up, for 5 minutes. It doesn't
Yeah.
even need to be a long huge commitment, it'll make their week.
Yeah.
And then you think later, yeah, when your kids leave the house, you're like, I hope they call me at least, once in a
Yeah.
while. Or text me is fine too. Just text me like,
Yeah.
what's up,
Well, you're probably seeing some of that with, like, you've got teenagers now and a daughter who's just got her driver's license. Like,
Yeah.
where is she? Like, why hasn't she called me? What's going on? Right. I'm sure that's
Yeah.
something you're going through too.
Yeah, you have to establish that too. Is like, you just text me, let me know what's up. It doesn't have to be a commitment, but we need to know what's going on.
Yeah. I don't know how much my parents would have paid for Find My Friends back when I was a teenager.
Yeah, yeah, different era.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to take you back a few years to when your first daughter was born. So did you have any fears about becoming a dad?
um, Fears. I think um initially, I mean, I knew I always wanted to have kids, and Corey, I always saw eye to eye on that. We knew we would have kids together. Um, I think the one fear we had, would that it would be, especially when we were building our career in music at the time, I think we thought it would derail that. And so I think we were sort of hyper aware of in making sure that it didn't, we're
Mhm.
like, we shouldn't stop. Like, at that time it was on this course of like, make a record for a year and then go tour it for a year and then make another, it was like this 2 year
Mhm.
cycle. We just keep going. And like, and as we were trying to build that, we were like, yeah, but we want to have kids. And Corey wanted to have a first kid by the time she was 30, because we didn't want to be like older parents, we wanted to be sort of kind of young. We're like, and so she started to get close to 30, and we're like, we got to start thinking about our first kid. And um, we were actually on tour, and we're like, okay, we should have this kid, because then we're like planning it out. Like, this will be
Yeah.
at the, we had maybe 6 or 7 months left of touring in that cycle. So if she was pregnant during that time, then we'd go home, and then she'd have the last trimester off, and then we could have the baby. We'd write the record while the baby's little, record it, and then be right back on track. So we just kind of had a lot of like planning of us, like how this should work, in order to combat this fear of it derailing our career. And a lot of times people were like, it was funny because even like our agents and stuff were like, you're having a baby, you can't do this, you can't be in a, like, you shouldn't have a baby because things are going well and you don't want it to derail us. Like some of our agents and labels and stuff weren't helpful in that somewhere. But
Right.
and we were just always like, no, we're doing it. And they're like, okay, and so we didn't stop, and like,
Yeah.
they were back in, we figured out, we were touring, and when it was just the two of us and a small crew, it'd be like vans. And then, so when we had a baby, we're like, well, the baby is going to be like 3 months old and we're going to go back on this tour. And how do we make that work? So the baby's close by, Corey's nursing, blah, blah, blah. So we figured out that we should rent an RV. So then we could like park that right outside the venue.
Yeah.
Baby and the nanny, which would be like my cousin or Corey's mom or somebody, would be parked right outside the venue. There's like a bedroom in the back of the RV, so Corey could be there essentially all night except the hour and a half we're on stage. So we just kind of planned this out, where we were like, how can we make this work for us and the people that are on our crew and that sort of thing. And so it was just those little adjustments that we made to keep it going. And I mean, I remember one time, Maggie, we were about to go on stage at Austin City Limits, and Maggie had a really bad fever,
Oh
and
no.
she was young. I don't remember how young, but she was a baby still, and we're just like, do we need to? And I remember like thankfully the dressing room was like right next to the stage, and not like, or at least like like an inside, at least a semi-comfortable dressing room was
Yeah.
near the stage. So the nanny and the baby were like right there, and we're like, do we need to like take her to the hospital right now, or can we even play this show, and we're like, oh, we should probably just like maybe take her to the hospital. And then the nanny's like, she's fine, you got an hour, like a 45-minute set, we'll just like do the set and then take her into to get
Yeah.
checked out. But it was like those sort of decisions where we're like, what should we do here? Does the baby take precedence over the music? And sometimes it had to,
Yeah. And of course that happens at like Austin city limits and not like, some small club where you could take
yeah,
whatever, an hour and just figure it out or whatever, right? You're feeling that pressure. Like
yeah,
I'm literally choosing between my career and my child right now.
yeah. And sometimes you had to make those decisions, and I remember another thing that happened is, for the most part, we didn't have to turn down like big things. But there were some instances, like we were in Australia and we actually left. I don't know how old Maggie was, but she stayed with her grandmother for the week. And so we had this rule, like we would never be gone from her for more than a week. And so we went to Australia and the tour was going well. And then they're like, hey, you guys should just stay. We can get you on like the big day out festivals or whatever, like the big Australian festivals. You guys should just stay another 2 weeks. We'll get you on these festivals. And our agents are like, oh, you got to do it. It's huge. It's good money. It's like good visibility. And we're just like, sorry, we got to go home. And they're just like, are you insane? And we're like, yeah, we're going home, And so I remember that, like that one, from a business standpoint was not a fun decision to make, but Kori and I discussed it. We're like, we got to go home. Like, the baby needs us there. I don't know how old she was, but she was young, so we went home.
Yeah. So it must have been tough to kind of find that balance.
Yeah. It's just like a case by case basis. There's plenty of situations where we're like, we're doing it, okay,
Yeah.
maybe this is going to mean like the baby has to come on a flight to Spain, for like a ridiculous trip just to go do, Primavera or whatever. And then we're going to come home, or being on an English tour for 3 weeks. And the baby's just like, what are we doing in these, janky rock clubs in England, for this week, and like parked in the back of gas stations and stuff to sleep in the back of this RV. And we're just like, like you had to make sacrifices, but looking back on it, it was every bit of worth it. And I think the kids would say, oh, you're fine. I remember asking some, like good friends of mine that were on the crew being like, are we messing these kids up? Like, can you see from this like perspective? And they're just like, no, you guys are fine. Like you like are doting on your kids even while you're in the midst of all this. So I was like, okay. But I would like constantly ask my friends like on the crew, like my merch guys that I was like super close with, or my sound guys or tour managers, like who we always brought friends, and I'd be like, is this crazy? Is this dumb to treat kids like this? And they're just like, what are you talking about, dude? This is probably the best thing for them because you're with them,
Yeah. What an amazing experience for them too. Like when they, as they get older and have a chance to kind of look back on some of that, and some of that would be pretty well documented. Like I remember around that time of Rearrange Us, like that was kind of your thing, or at least that's what the media, kind of picked up on or whatever. Like you guys were really owning it. Like we're bringing our kids out on tour and that's our thing. And that like almost worked as like a marketing thing for you. I feel like I even remember for me, that would have been a number of years before I had kids. We had our first daughter in 2015, but I kind of like looking back on it now, I remember thinking like, yeah, that looks cool. Like, so, maybe that's not going to be me touring with my kids one day, but you can still like be cool. You can still do fun things or things you care about and follow your dreams, and kids don't have to kind of necessarily ruin that,
Yeah. Well, that was always like the catch-22 of it. It was like, okay, it's cool. You guys, it's like punk rock, what you guys do is like punk rock, but you're a family. Like is it like domestic? Like that's not punk rock, And so it was always this like, are we punk? Or are we not punk? And I was like, well, it's pretty punk to just decide to bring kids on tour, but it's also not punk to just like, yeah, want to be like a family and be like, I'm a dad, I'm a rad dad, and like, and just own that aspect of it, and I don't know. And I think what I ultimately came to a conclusion of was like, it's punk rock across the board just to be who you are and own who you are. And so I was like, and that's all we did, and like, it became sort of this like media touch point just because it was unique-ish at the time, and that we didn't hide from it. Some people would be like, some people are in relationships and bands and they don't want that to be a focus at all, or they deny it to, but we were just like, yeah, this is who we are. And they're just like, well, what's that like being, married and having kids in a band, we're like, it's not like anything except our lives. It's just like what we would be doing if we're just happen to be touring while we're doing it. You know, it's just our life. So the two really aren't separate. It's not like a thing it's like to be. It's just the thing, you know?
Yeah, I think like, you know, from a kind of fan perspective, people always like to feel like they kind of know who they're listening to, right? Or,
Yeah.
you know, kind of, you know, there's more of a connection than just I like your album. They kind of feel like they're kind of part of your world, and that's something I think you guys have done well. I know that's something you probably have to balance out, like not kind of oversharing or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, and you want to think about that. Especially, it's probably harder now too, as we're in kind of the social media age, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a bigger topic. Like, what do you share about your kids and your family and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
But that was always, I think, something that was really cool about what you guys did. So, how do you think being a dad has changed you?
Ah, God, probably in so many ways. Um, I've been a dad for a while now. I'm, how has it changed me? I mean, I think it's probably made me uh, think about myself a lot less, you know, and think about like decisions that I would make maybe in the past and be like, I don't want to do that or I shouldn't do that because of what that could mean for my kids or my family.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think just being less selfish, you know, too, is just like I want to, rather than always sort of doing the things that I want to do, it's like, well, what do they want to do? You know, what would they prefer to do rather than like running around doing our crazy thing? And I think it probably stemmed from like always bringing them on tour, like we're doing our thing, you know, and like and there's a certain aspect of that that is like cool and shows them that you should be doing your thing, like no matter what. But you have to bring your family, your people along, so to
Mm-hmm.
speak, to the degree that they want to be brought along, you know. And I think that kind of carries over into you know, my daily life too with the kids. Is like, oh, are you guys interested in, you know, doing this? I'll take you with, or if not, then, you know, like I'm really, for example, like I'm really into mountain biking, and I'm always like trying to get my older two girls to like, hey, you want to go mountain biking? You know, you want to try this? And they're just like, nah. And I'm like, okay, I guess I won't go mountain biking right now, even though I really want to go mountain biking. You know,
Right.
what do you want to do instead? So I think that's sort of an example of like not always just doing like first the thing that you want to do, but like,
Yeah, and it's not that easy, right? Like, especially, I think in the beginning, like as you have kids, your whole life leading up to that point, it is just about you. So that transition can be really hard for people.
yeah.
So it's like, how do I how do I adjust to this new life of where I have to kind of think about somebody else before me, and weigh that out. um
That's a really hard question though for me. I mean, are you are you able to like see the way that you change? You personally?
yeah, that's a good question. I don't know, like I think it in retrospect you can kind of look at this, like maybe this shift of what was I like before to a number of years after, but you kind of don't really see it happening as it's happening, I don't think. And it doesn't come, it's not like a switch you flip, right? Like it's
Yeah.
hard.
Well, that like when you asked that question, I think my mind immediately went back to like, well, what did I used to be like before I like I am now? And I'm like, I don't even know, you know,
Yeah.
like who am I? What am I now? And how is that different from what I used to be? But I think to your point is like, yeah, the only way, I don't know, that'd be a good thing to try to understand is if you can see yourself changing like on a smaller scale, you know,
Yeah.
if you can see the little things, that would be a challenging
Well, and
thing
who
to do.
who has time to even like go like explore that or have insight into that? Because like you even talked about earlier, like that first year with a baby is like a total whirlwind. Like I even look back on with both my kids, like that first year after they're born is like, you know, no sleep, just having to kind of adapt to every situation on the fly. You can't plan anything ahead because maybe the baby's hungry, maybe the baby's crying, maybe they need to sleep or whatever. And so you almost just are like in survival mode. I feel. So it would be hard to try and have that insight.
That'd be a good challenge though, because
Mm-hmm.
COVID sort of made me realize too, is like, sometimes you're in these like situations, you're like, well, this is what life's like right now, and you're like, okay, so right now I'm working remotely, and then the weekends are the times that we like do this. Like one kid's got like a dance lesson or whatever, and you do that on the weekends. And then all of a sudden you realize, oh, but now, and it just happens, and you're like, oh, I'm no longer on that project. So now my weeks are filled with, I have them pretty open. And so like all of a sudden things have changed and you don't even realize like that era just ended. So it's like knowing where that stopping point is in a change,
Yeah.
I think is it impossible? Maybe not. Maybe it's just be more aware. I don't know.
It almost like I'm thinking about like, oh, would like journaling or something, would that help? Like, what about in terms of your songwriting? Did that change with kids? Like, did the content of your songs reflect any of that, do you think? I don't know. Like, I haven't thought about it, before going into this interview, but I'm wondering.
Wow, that's a really good point actually to this conversation, is that records always delineated a point in your life, right? And then you can look back now and I can be like, oh, I remember recording Team Boo and what I was like then. And that's totally different than what we were like with the record after that, Bring It Back, and we had our first baby, and I remember recording that one. So it was like, actually records are a good like signpost markers of like how you've changed and what time was like during those periods.
Yeah. Well, like we were talking about My Only Offer, like that's a lot of the content to that song, and I don't have the lyrics in front of me right now, but I kind of remember, bought a home, we bartered, right? Like all that stuff, 2 kids, 2 car to light.
Mm-hmm.
That's about your family life, like that at least that section of it, right? And
yeah, absolutely,
that's kind of an interesting thing.
So I think records are journals, like you said. If you journal, you can kind of see what you were like at that time just by what your thoughts were.
Right. Oh, that's cool. I'll have to start thinking about that with other musicians and seeing if I can kind of figure out where they were in their lives and how that relates to their journey as a parent. Maybe to challenge musicians with that a little bit.
Yeah, it is true. Like it's actually very easy to put myself, like just think of an album and then just like put myself back in that place based on that album. It's very easy to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But with some other things, yeah, it's just like a really good signpost, I think.
Yeah. So what are the most rewarding parts about being a dad?
Just seeing them do things that are cool, like seeing them achieve something or have success or laugh, like a belly laugh, just like those little sort of moments, and then being like, things are all right. Like life's okay, and then like seeing how quickly that can change too. I mean, talking about change again is like hearing like my daughter, gripe about some issue she's having with her friend and how it's just like life or death.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like so upset. And then like an hour later, she'll just like be cracking some joke, about that. And I'll be like, oh, it's over. That whole drama thing is over and it's fine. It's just moving on. And it wasn't as big a deal as it seemed like. It seemed like life or death an hour ago. Now it's just like, I really love to do like laugh, and a big sort of, when they make me laugh, like they'll tell like a witty joke or something, either one of them, and I'll just like, that's good. I'll be like, that's funny, like I'll straight up say that's a good one, that's funny. And I think that's one of my favorite parts of like being a dad.
So is that like a marker of them becoming like an individual? Is that what you really like about it? Like,
yeah, is they just have this idea and then they see something funny in this situation, and it's like their own idea about what makes it funny, and then them like saying it back to me and thinking that I would think it's funny too, and then I actually do think it's funny. It's just like this whole them having this idea about a situation and them being right about it.
Yeah. Humor is kind of an interesting one, right? I feel like you have to almost teach your kids like how to appreciate humor. I have 2 little kids. We've talked about that already, but my oldest, who's just about 5, she's like starting to get it, like understand jokes and stuff. But my youngest, it's so funny. She loves to tell knock knock jokes and they don't make any sense, right?
Oh yeah.
But it's so funny. But
Yeah.
once they figure it out and they kind of get what that humor is, it is kind of a neat thing. Like, oh man, you put that together. That's cool.
Yeah. Once they yeah, like the first thing is just like butt humor, you know, poop
Yeah.
humor. And then you're like, all right, we always call it the age of butt. Like, all right, they're
Yeah.
still in the age of butt, you know. But then once they get out of that and then like start putting ideas together about like what they see in the world and what they think's funny, yeah, that's next level. And
Yeah.
then it just continues from there, you know.
So we you know, we have talked a lot about kind of what your experience has been with your kids on the road and how you guys have kind of managed that. Now that's changed over the last few years. It seems like you haven't probably been doing that as much, especially with your kids being a bit older. You talked about them being kind of rooted in their lives, right? It's a little harder to pull them away from their friends and school, and those things are a little bit more important. What have the last number of years looked like in terms of kind of managing that? And I know you guys maybe haven't been doing as much musically. You've been focusing on a kind of a new career as well. How have you kind of managed to balance that all?
Yeah, there was a couple of years of real transition because, you know, we toured relentlessly for a long time and it just became a big part of our identity is like we're touring musicians and that's
Mm-hmm.
primarily how we like make money, you know, and that's the only way we made money for a long time. And so at first I think it sort of hit us hard. We were just like, oh, you know, we could keep touring more and more and more, but it's like, I don't know, we wanted to get off of that train for a minute, you know, but at the same time, we didn't want to get off that train because it's like, that was such a big part of our identity. So there was, you know, it was like a lot of discussions and like us just trying to figure out like what the next steps would be, you know. And I think the hardest part was just like not being able to, while we were trying to figure out like other ways to like make some money, is like not having the time to create and make music together, you know. Whereas we used to do it, you know, 6 or 7 days a week, hours a day, you know, whittled down to a few days a week. And that I think was the hardest part for us, is just not being able to create in the way that we had been creating together for a long time. And so as things have developed, that's still sort of like we're always trying to find more and more time to create together. And there'll be like bouts of it, but it won't be like full on the way we had. So that's been the hardest transition. But also it's, in a way, it's really sparked the inspiration to want to do it even more, you know, because for a while, because we were just on that train, it became sort of like, we got to do this next, we got to do this next, and you got to do better than the last time, and you got to blah blah blah, you know, maybe we should try to write it like this so that it sells more, and you know, all that kind of those thoughts that just come along with like a growing successful business in art, you know, or music. But because we didn't rely on it so much as our main financial piece, then we've just had that inspiration to just create together and just like get in the room and just like make music, and whatever comes, you know, just like back to just like honest music, rather than not thinking like, well, how will this fit on a record, or what will the label say about this, you know, that kind of thing. So I think that's been a really good thing, you know. And then now seeing what's happening with touring bands, and that it's non-existent, and it's going to be probably for the better part of 2 years, in a way it seems like, oh, maybe that's, you know, maybe we got a little bit ahead of the curve in that, and it's worked out better for us in this situation, is that we were like not now being like, oh, I got nothing.
Yeah,
it went from 100 to 0, whereas we sort of like tailored it down and slowly slowed it down over the course of a number of years, and then might be able to buy in some time to get it revved back up to where we want it to be, you know.
Right. So it sounds like having that bit of maybe a break, obviously that transition was tough to get used to, kind of that new, I guess that maybe it's a more domesticated life, or more, you know, typically domestic life, versus what you were doing before. But they kind of say absence makes the heart grow fonder. Maybe I'm kind of hearing that that's sort of what's happening with regards to your music. Like you guys kind of have a renewed interest in that.
Yeah, and when we do write songs together, we're really sort of rejuvenated and super excited. And we're like, oh, we still got it in us. You know what I mean? We still have that spark, and we feel like we have good songs to write yet. I remember, back when we were really in the cycle of just like go, 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 some of our manager labels sometimes be like, you guys ever think about it's like taking like some time off and going away and like getting out of people's, just like disappearing and then coming back with this new rejuvenation thing. And we're just like, no, we want to keep going, And I think now it's sort of been this like forced going away.
Mm-hmm.
And I think now the result is the same, as it'll be like this new rejuvenation. And when we do come out with, a new album, new music, it'll be this new era of us, and sort of a reinvention of like where we are right now.
Cool.
So
cool.
I think I'm hopeful, and I'm really excited about like what music we'll make when we do make it full on. Yeah.
So we're going to maybe come back to that in a little bit. I'm going to put you on the spot here. We do a kind of a feature called the Rad Dad Bad Dad feature. And it's basically just an opportunity for you to share, if one comes to mind, sort of that blue ribbon, feel good dad moment, that Rad Dad moment, something that comes to your mind. And then if you can, we call it the bad dad moment, but one of those times when you're just like, oh, like, I can't believe I did that, or, whatever, the facepalm kind of dad moment. Anything come to mind?
The bad dad, that one came to mind first. And I mean, many of those, I'm sure. But one that I always think about, because it was like, okay, so we were camping, right? So we were camping, we brought our bikes, and Maggie was probably, I don't know how old she was, like 10 maybe, or 11, little young still, right? And like we unloaded her bike and off of the car, whatever, we packed our bikes, and I jumped on it and I start riding around, and she's like, give me my bike. And I was just like, and she like almost, and I was just like, hold on, I'm just like checking it out. And she was like, and she like started crying about it. And I was like, are you really crying? And she's like, yeah, I want my bike. And I was like, you're acting like a little child. And she goes, I am a child. And I was like, oh, that's right, you are a child. She was like crying, and I was like cruising around her bike, and I was like, just wait, and she's like running behind me, crying, and basically being like, I am a child. And I was like, yeah, I'm being a dick right now. So here's your bike.
Yeah, that's funny. I definitely find that even, with my younger kids, like, I think sometimes I kind of like step back. I'm like, geez, like I'm expecting way too much out of them. Like, I'm like, why didn't you do that? Or why didn't you think ahead? Or, like they don't, they're kids.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a good one. And it's funny, like it obviously stuck with you. That's 5 years ago or whatever.
Yeah.
And that moment,
I just remember thinking like, she just kept saying like, get off my bike. And I was just like, I'm riding the bike, I'm like, like, just let me ride the bike. And I was just like, a kid and her bike, that's like a big deal. And so I was, and just, I guess the biggest point for me was her being like, I'm a child. Like, you're saying quit acting like a child, but I am a child. I don't know how any other way to act. You know?
Yeah. So. Yeah. That's a good one. How about that? How about the Rad Dad moment? Anything come to mind?
Oh, Rad Dad. I mean, I'm really bad at like tooting my own horn.
This is your opportunity to do it. You're on the Rad Dad show.
I will say, okay, the other night, this happened like a couple weeks ago, right before Maggie got her license. And she was over at her friend's house. They're all 16, like hanging out. And apparently I went to pick her up, and she had recently told me about this song, White Ferrari by Frank Ocean.
Okay.
Do you know this song?
I don't know it. No.
And she played it for me, and I was just like, oh my God, immediately fell in love with the song. I was like, this is one of the most beautiful songs. So good. And I went and picked her up, and I queued that song up because we had just gotten into it like 2 days later. And she gets in the car, and I push play and start driving away. And she goes, oh, you're listening to White Ferrari, huh? And I was like, yeah, I queued it up. I had it ready. And she goes, you queued that up for me? And I was like, yeah. And she goes, I knew it. And I was like, what? And she goes, yeah, my friends and I were like having this discussion, and like one of her friends is like, I hate my dad. I've never once said I love you to my dad, blah blah blah. And Maggie was like, and I told him I love my dad. I told him you were really nice to me. And she goes, and
Wow.
this just proves it. You had this song queued up that you knew I would like, and I was just like, oh, right on.
Wow.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, small gesture, but like obviously really meaningful to her, right? And
Yeah.
for her to kind of express that to you, that's really cool.
Yeah, that one that really hit me. And then the fact that she was just discussing that with her friends.
Yeah. Yeah.
But listen to the song. The song actually is a key important part to that entire story, because you listen to that song on top of the story, and it's just like,
I'll go check it out. I've had friends over the years telling me to check out Frank Ocean. I just have never really gotten around to it, so I will after this.
Yeah, White Ferrari. I mean, it's on Orange or whatever that famous album is.
Yeah,
but it's a great song.
Cool. So what's next for you, Jason? We kind of have maybe hinted at some some new Mates of State material maybe at some point down the road. Yeah, where are things at? What can we expect from Jason Hammel in 2021?
Oh man, there's so many things that are sort of bubbling under, I guess, a little bit. Number one, yeah, we're gonna make a new Mates of State record.
Awesome.
Kori and I. Kori's working on a music project of like piano stuff. We have a grand piano, and I don't know if you know this, but there's huge playlists. A lot of people just like go to Spotify and like put in like piano pop songs or whatever, and it's all background piano music.
Yep.
So Kori's making some albums with that.
Cool.
Just to pop those in, and I'm helping her record them. I have done some acting things recently, and I'm in still working on some acting classes. So I'm always working on projects with that. I'm working on some film stuff, some friends who are writers, and I'm gonna produce them. So there's
cool.
I don't know, kind of stuff. I got a children's book in me. So
wow.
Yeah, there's a lot of possible stuff.
So where's the kids' book in the process? Still kind of in the formative stages?
Yeah, it's just all outlined, but I haven't written it yet. But I have it heavily outlined.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, that's exciting. Well, Jason, it's been really cool talking to you today, and kind of getting to hear your perspective on parenthood. You have a unique one, given your experience of having your kids on tour with you. So that's been really cool to hear. Any words of wisdom for dads out there listening? Maybe their dads, maybe their dads to be.
Yeah, just spend time with your kids. That's all they want. And the more time that you spend with them, the more you understand them, And if you're not around them, if you're constantly being like, well, I got to do this, I got to do that. I mean, you don't even need to sit around and like constantly think of things to say. I recently heard this thing too. It's like, you can just sit in silence with them. And sometimes that's the best thing, It's just like in your car ride, you don't have to constantly be like, oh, it's awkward if I'm not, trying to engage this conversation. Just like let it happen naturally. And but the more time that you spend with them, the more you know them, and it doesn't matter what you're doing. You don't even have to do anything fancy. You're just with them and available to them. That's really the only thing I got, is be with them.
Yeah, that's great advice. Well, thanks again for your time today, Jason.